honey, the only thing you've been running in circles is your own arrogance, and it's about to crash.
You think you're some almighty judge? I run circles around fools like you while you sit there pretending to know everything.
The courtroom seemed to hold its breath before the cameras even stopped rolling. A laugh echoed through the room, a sharp, scornful sound that wasn't nervous nor polite. It was the laughter of someone convinced they were untouchable. A laugh dripping with self-importance, the kind that can silence a room, or at least make everyone cringe. Karen Mitchell leaned back in her chair, smirking as though she were hosting a talk show rather than standing trial. Her gaze slid over Judge Judy with the condescension of a parent humoring a naive child. She had no idea what she was about to face. Karen, known in whispered circles of Willow Creek Estates as Fat Karen, had ruled her suburban kingdom for nearly 10 years. As president of the local homeowners association, she wielded her authority like a scalpel, precise, cutting, and entirely devoid of empathy. Residents talked about her behind closed doors, likening her to a strict principal who never quite left detention duty. Karen thrived on the fear and obedience of others. Every fine she levied, every complaint she filed, every night spent on the phone with code enforcement fed a sense of power she mistook for respect. She wasn't the kind to bake cookies or hand out welcome gifts. She was the type to shut down block parties over a mismatched decoration, reveling in control. Today, she came to court expecting victory. Her target, Lillian Cortez, a quiet, soft-spoken neighbor accused of willful property damage. In other words, planting sunflowers a little too high, casting slight shadows, disrupting Karen's illusion of uniform perfection. It was petty, ridiculous even, and that was exactly why it had caught the attention of national television producers. The clash between a self-important suburban queen and Judge Judy promised ratings and spectacle. The moment Judge Judy entered, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations halted, cameras studied, and even the air seemed heavier. Judy's presence alone demanded attention. Her silence carried decades of authority. Karen, oblivious to the current of power in the room, adjusted her cardigan and offered a tight, rehearsed smile. It wasn't respect, it was mockery disguised as charm. "Good morning, Your Honor," she said, deliberately emphasizing her title, with a smirk that suggested she was in control. "I hope we can resolve this quickly. I have a homeowners meeting afterward." Judy's expression remained unreadable, her voice calm but edged with an unmistakable warning. "We'll take as long as necessary," she replied. "Now, Mrs. Mitchell, why are we here today?" Karen leaned forward, papers in hand, her posture exuding authority. "Your Honor, this is a matter of community respect. The defendant knowingly violated our landscaping regulations, despite repeated warnings. She refuses to pay fines. Accountability is essential." Her tone was smooth, practiced a speech she had delivered countless times at HOA meetings where her word was law. Today she expected no different. Across the aisle, Lillian Cortez remained quiet, hands clasped in her lap, eyes downcast. Years of harassment had taken their toll. When Judy turned to her, she spoke softly. "How long has this been going on?" "Almost 3 years, Your Honor," Lillian replied. "I've paid over $8,000 in fines. Every time I tried to comply, Mrs. Mitchell found something else to punish me for." The courtroom shifted, sensing the imbalance. Karen's eyes flicked to the cameras, recognizing for the first time that the story might not favor her. She tried to dismiss it with a muttered, "Some people just don't like rules." But Judy and everyone present heard it. The next minute showcased Karen's arrogance in full. She interrupted, corrected Judy's interpretations of adulations, laughed dismissively, and carried herself as if the courtroom existed to validate her ego. When Judy issued her first warning, "Mrs. Mitchell, choose your words carefully," Karen only chuckled, letting her arrogance paint her downfall. That laugh, mocking, confident, and utterly unrepentant, would later echo through social media for years to come. What Karen didn't realize was that Judy already had the bigger picture. The evidence, the records, and even suspicious financial patterns within the HOA were all in her hands. This wasn't a petty dispute anymore. It was a ticking time bomb waiting for the perfect moment to detonate, and Karen had just lit the fuse herself. The courtroom felt the shift immediately. Most people would have softened, reconsidered their tone, perhaps straightened up. But Karen doubled down. "Relax, Your Honor," she said, dismissing the room with a wave of her hand. "I know how the law works." Judy's gaze remained sharp, measuring, deliberate. Her voice, calm and slow, carried the weight of inevitability. "Mrs. Mitchell, you may want to choose your words more carefully. I do not issue threats. I issue rulings." Karen, intoxicated by her own sense of superiority, continued. "But HOA matters are specialized. I've been president for years. Most judges don't understand these communities. I've studied the state property code thoroughly." A collective gasp swept through the room. On national television, she had just insinuated that Judge Judy, a legal veteran far older and more experienced than Karen, lacked understanding. Yet Karen didn't see it as arrogance. She saw it as proof of her dominance. Judy leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a measured, cutting edge. "Are you suggesting I am not qualified to interpret the law?" Karen's smirk widened, blind to the storm forming. "I'm saying HOA matters are unique. I've run this association for years. Expertise matters." The courtroom's silence was suffocating. Every pause, every breath became a statement. Karen, mistaking Judy's patience for hesitation, pressed on, detailing her version of justice, her obsession with order, and her belief in her own righteousness. She failed to see the cracks forming beneath her polished exterior, the audience sensing a reckoning long before she did. Judge Judy finally exhaled softly, her voice calm but undeniably dangerous. "You believe your actions are justified, then?" "Absolutely," Karen said, her confidence unwavering, or so she thought. Judy leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving Karen. "Does it?" she asked, barely above a whisper. The single word hung in the air like a challenge. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but Judy raised a hand, silencing her instantly. "Remember," Judy said, each word deliberate, "this is my courtroom, not a neighborhood meeting. When I allow you to speak, it is a privilege, not a right." Karen forced another brittle laugh. "Whatever you say, Your Honor. I face worse from my HOA board." The tension was electric. Judy's voice dropped, a cold precision now threading every syllable. "This is not a threat, Mrs. Mitchell. It is a guarantee. Keep laughing, and you may discover what happens when scrutiny extends to your own records." For the first time, doubt flickered in Karen's eyes. But it was too late. The cameras were rolling. The arrogance that had built her empire was about to lay the blueprint for her collapse. Years of power, carefully constructed authority, and petty tyranny had led Karen Mitchell to this exact moment, a courtroom where laughter would be her undoing. And the shadow of justice had already crept over her domain. Asterisk, the courtroom had changed since the first exchange. Karen Mitchell, once a towering presence in Willow Creek Estates, now seemed smaller, the edges of her confidence beginning to fray. She fidgeted with her papers, flipping through them as if the perfect page could shield her from the storm that Judge Judy had quietly set in motion. The audience, still tense, sensed the subtle shift. No one applauded. No one laughed. Everyone was waiting for the moment the facade would finally crumble. Judge Judy didn't speak immediately. Instead, she picked up a folder from the bench, her eyes scanning the documents as though reading not just words on paper, but the weight of a lifetime of choices. Every fine Karen had levied, every rule she had weaponized, every letter she had sent to her neighbors was cataloged meticulously, silently screaming volumes about her obsession with control. Karen, unaware of the meticulous web being observed by an experienced eye, continued to speak, attempting to defend her years of dominion. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Karen said, voice steady, "my actions have always been about maintaining community standards. It's about responsibility, ensuring property values remain high, and that residents comply with the rules they agreed to when they purchased their homes." Judy's gaze, calm but penetrating, didn't waver. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said slowly, "I understand that you believe your intentions were noble, but this court examines outcomes, not intentions." Karen raised a brow, mistaking the soft tone for curiosity rather than warning. "Exactly," she said, leaning forward, and the outcome has been uniform compliance. Residents know the rules and follow them. That's evidence of leadership, don't you think? The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the camera crew, used to courtroom drama, leaned forward instinctively. There was something in Judy's eyes, a quiet storm, that made it impossible to ignore the truth hiding behind Karen's words. Judge Judy finally spoke, flipping open the folder with deliberate care. "Let's examine that evidence, shall we?" she said, her tone calm but heavy with implication. She began to read aloud the HOA's financial records, starting with an innocuous entry. Annual landscaping payments, vendor names, amounts. Then, with surgical precision, she connected the numbers to a personal account registered to Karen Mitchell. The room exhaled collectively. Karen's smile faltered. For the first time, she seemed genuinely unsure. "That must be a mistake," she stammered. "The treasurer handles those payments." "Yes," Judy replied, her voice unwavering. "Your cousin listed as treasurer with the same address and email you use personally. That appears to be more than coincidence." Karen's fingers trembled, curling around her papers. I can't explain," she whispered. The audience leaned forward. They had all seen Arrogance before, but this was different. This was the slow, deliberate unraveling of someone who had built her life on control and intimidation. Judy didn't respond immediately. She let the pause linger, letting the weight of the evidence press down. When she spoke again, it was deliberate. "Mrs. Mitchell, the records show repeated transfers labeled as community improvements directly into your personal account. Over $50,000 in 4 years. Do you wish to explain these transactions to this court?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again, searching desperately for a lifeline. The audience murmured softly, sensing that the end of her reign was approaching. Karen's mind raced. How could she spin this? How could she regain control of a narrative she had dominated for a decade? This is standard practice," she finally exclaimed, trying to regain authority. "Every community has expenses, and adjustments occur regularly. I don't see the problem." Judy leaned forward slightly, voice lowering to a measured, chilling precision. "Mrs. Mitchell, these are not minor discrepancies. They are transfers coinciding with fines imposed on Mrs. Cortez, the exact amount issued 1 day prior." "Coincidence?" The courtroom went silent. Karen's breathing quickened. Her hands fidgeted nervously. The smirk that had carried her through years of intimidation was gone, replaced by a fleeting expression of panic. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form. "You see," Judy continued, "intentions do not absolve action. Leadership is not a shield for personal gain. Accountability is not optional. Mrs. Mitchell, it's the very foundation of trust, and you've spent years eroding it under the guise of authority." Karen's eyes darted to the audience, hoping for an ally, someone to validate her sense of control. There was none. Her neighbor's silent expressions, her peers' constrained posture, and the collective focus of the cameras all pointed in unison at her vulnerability. She had been exposed, not just for the petty tyranny she wielded over Willow Creek estates, but for the misuse of power and funds she had considered untouchable. The bailiff shifted, a subtle yet pointed reminder of decorum, while Judy's gaze remained fixed, patient but lethal in its precision. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to assert control. "I've dedicated my life to this community. I've worked tirelessly." Judy's hand rose slightly, cutting through the words. "Dedication does not justify dishonesty, Mrs. Mitchell. Effort does not erase exploitation. The ledger does not lie, and today, it speaks louder than your explanations ever could." Karen's eyes welled with tears, her fingers twisting in her lap. Every line of defense she had rehearsed, every smile she had perfected, every threat she had masked as authority was unraveling under the calm, merciless scrutiny of Judge Judy. The audience could feel the tension, thick and electric. Every word, every pause, every deliberate gesture from Judy reinforced the inevitable conclusion. Karen Mitchell was no longer in command. Her kingdom of rules and fines, built on fear and meticulous control, was slipping through her fingers faster than she could comprehend. Judy's voice dropped to a whisper, yet it cut through the room like glass. Mrs. Mitchell, you've spent years believing that power resides in your authority, in the fines, in the letters, and the fear of your neighbors. But real power, she said, eyes narrowing slightly, is rooted in integrity. And that you've squandered. Karen's lips quivered. Her shoulders slumped. She had never felt so small, so unarmed, so exposed. For the first time in a decade, the woman who ruled Willow Creek Estates with the precision of a tyrant realized she could not control the narrative. The cameras didn't capture a confident leader. They captured a woman on the edge of collapse, her empire of intimidation unraveling in real time. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Karen's laughter, once so commanding and cruel, had vanished. In its place was the tremor of a woman grasping for control that had long since left her grasp. Judge Judy didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth itself was the hammer, and Karen had forged her own destruction with every decree, every fine, every petty act of dominance. As the folder slid across the bench, containing the irrefutable evidence of financial misconduct. Karen reached for it, but hesitation froze her fingers. She knew deep down that no explanation would undo the damning proof. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to react, waiting for the inevitable confession of a woman who had once wielded fear like a crown. And in that moment, Karen Mitchell realized something terrifying. The world she had ruled through control and intimidation had no place for her now. The first cracks in her carefully constructed armor had appeared, and they were widening fast. Judge Judy had set the stage, and the spotlight was merciless. Karen's downfall was no longer a possibility, it was imminent. The courtroom had settled into a heavy, anticipatory silence. Karen Mitchell sat rigid, her fingers still trembling as the folder of financial records rested ominously before her. The confident, smirking woman who had once ruled Willow Creek Estates like a queen had been replaced by someone unmoored, unsure of how to navigate a situation where the rules she had weaponized now turned against her. Judge Judy's eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the documents again. Each page was like a scalpel tracing the exact outline of Karen's misdeeds. There was no room for misinterpretation, no room for distraction. And Judy made sure the courtroom and Karen felt that weight with every deliberate breath she took. Mrs. Mitchell, Judy began, calm but deliberate, let's go deeper. We've established that transfers of community funds went directly to your personal accounts. But we need context. How often did this occur, and what justifications, if any, can you provide? Karen swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had expected to defend herself with charm, deflection, maybe even a small show of indignation. Instead, she felt the air grow thick, each word from Judy acting as a measured hammer against the walls of her fabricated empire. Your Honor, she began, voice shaky but still trying to convey authority. These were routine reimbursements. Community expenses, maintenance, things I handled personally to expedite processes. Nothing was hidden. Everything was for the good of the neighborhood. Judy's gaze narrowed. Routine reimbursements that coincide with fines you imposed, labeled as maintenance, and sent to your personal checking account. That's your explanation? The words hung in the air like a guillotine poised above a crown. Karen's lips parted, but no reply came. The audience shifted, some leaning forward, others whispering quietly to themselves. The camera captured every twitch of Karen's expression, the flicker of panic behind her eyes, the subtle quiver of her jaw, the faint reddening of her face as the weight of exposure pressed down. Judy continued, her voice calm, almost clinical. Let's go over the pattern. Over the past 4 years, your HOA collected fines from residents, including Mrs. Cortez. In nearly every instance, a transfer matching the fine amount appeared in your accounts the very next day. Can you provide a logical explanation for this consistent overlap? Karen blinked rapidly. Her mind scrambled for justification. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. This was an undeniable trail of evidence pointing directly to her actions. I don't recall the exact dates, she muttered, but I assure you, all funds were for community use. Any similarity in dates is purely coincidental. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the bailiff's raised eyebrow betrayed disbelief. Coincidence? In 4 consecutive years? Judy's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Mrs. Mitchell, do you expect this court to believe that repeated, precise transfers totaling tens of thousands of dollars are mere coincidences? Karen's fingers gripped the edge of the table. Her breath came shallow, quick. She began, but her voice faltered. Let's bring some clarity, Judy said, gesturing toward the clerk. Please display the summary of these transfers on the monitor. Asterisk, the courtroom lights adjusted, and the audience saw a timeline of fines, each followed immediately by a deposit to Karen's personal account. The pattern was irrefutable, a visual hammer driving the point home. Karen's confident posture collapsed slightly. The smirk that had carried her through years of attorney was gone, replaced by the stark realization that her empire of fear and control had exposed itself as a fraud. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the room. Mrs. Mitchell, when did you decide your position allowed you to manipulate community funds for personal gain? Be honest, because your ledger is speaking louder than your words. Karen's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but the words came out as fragmented stammers. I didn't mean to. I thought I was. It was for the community. Asterisk, Judy's eyes sharpened. Thought you were what? Managing funds for expediency? Using authority as your personal ATM? There's no justification for this pattern of behavior. None. The audience collectively held its breath. The momentum of the courtroom had shifted entirely. Karen, once the orchestrator of fear and control, was now the subject of scrutiny, cornered by facts and evidence she could no longer manipulate. Every detail she had overlooked, the public ledger, the receipts, the dates, was a nail in the coffin of her credibility. Judy's tone remained calm, almost conversational, but each word carried an undeniable weight. And let's not forget the human cost of your actions. The Cortez family, among others, suffered years of fines and harassment, all while you funneled their money into your own accounts. Accountability isn't selective, Mrs. Mitchell. You may have ruled Willow Creek Estates, but the law doesn't bow to arrogance. Karen's hands shook. Her carefully constructed narrative of benevolent oversight was unraveling in real time. But I was just enforcing the rules, she whispered. Judy's reply was sharp, precise, and devastating. Enforcing rules does not give you license to steal, manipulate, or intimidate. Authority without integrity is tyranny, Mrs. Mitchell, and tyranny always leaves a trail. Yours is now laid bare for everyone to see. Karen's shoulders slumped. Her voice dropped to a fragile murmur. I didn't steal. I just borrowed. Borrowed? Judy repeated, her tone lethal in its calmness. Borrowing without consent is theft, period. And your ledger proves you did it repeatedly. The courtroom was deathly silent. Every eye was on Karen, every camera zoomed in on her as she fought to maintain a veneer of control. But there was none left. Her dominance over Willow Creek Estates had been built on intimidation, and now the full force of accountability was descending like a storm she couldn't escape. Judy paused, letting the silence stretch. Every breath, every small movement from Karen was a testament to the inevitability of her downfall. Finally, Judy leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto Karen's, cold and relentless. Mrs. Mitchell, the evidence is irrefutable. Your position, your power, and your influence over this community are now secondary to your actions. You've spent years exploiting trust and authority for personal gain. How do you intend to make this right? Karen's hands trembled as she reached for her papers. She opened her mouth, but no words formed. The weight of years of arrogance, entitlement, and unchecked control had finally pressed her into silence. The courtroom watched, captivated by the spectacle of a queen dethroned by truth, her empire crumbling under the inexorable force of accountability. Judge Judy's voice cut through the tension once more, calm yet final. Consider this your opportunity, Mrs. Mitchell. The evidence is clear. The ledger is unambiguous. The question now is whether you'll face the consequences or continue clinging to a facade that has already failed you. Karen's eyes darted nervously. The smirk, once a shield, was gone. All that remained was a woman facing the reality that the walls she had built for control were now the very walls enclosing her downfall. The audience, tense and silent, waited for the next move. Every camera in the room captured her moment of reckoning, an unraveling not just of a life, but of an identity forged through fear and authority. The countdown had begun. Karen Mitchell, once queen of Willow Creek Estates, was standing on the edge of an abyss she had unknowingly built with every act of arrogance, every fine, every rule enforced with cruelty. And Judge Judy, unshaken and precise, held the gavel, the final instrument of reckoning, ready to bring it crashing down. Asterisk. The courtroom had become a charged chamber of inevitability. Karen Mitchell, once the untouchable queen of Willow Creek Estates, sat rigid in her chair, the trembling in her hands betraying the confidence she had clung to for years. The smirk that had once announced her dominance was gone, replaced by an anxious, pale mask of fear. Every eye in the room was fixed on her. Every camera capturing the precise moment a life built on control teetered on collapse. Judge Judy's gaze was unyielding, a sharp, measured force that cut through the air like a scalpel. "Mrs. Mitchell," she began, her voice calm but heavy with authority, "we've reviewed the evidence, examined the financial records, and heard testimony from the residents you claim to serve. The question before this court is not whether you were in a position of power, it's how you used that power. And the evidence shows a pattern of exploitation, intimidation, and misappropriation of funds. How do you respond?" Karen swallowed hard, her lips trembling. She had rehearsed defenses, rationalizations, even tears, but nothing had prepared her for the clinical, unstoppable force of truth that now pressed down on her. "Your Honor," she began, voice barely above a whisper, I thought I was helping the community. Every decision I made was in the interest of maintaining order, keeping things safe, organized." Judge Judy's expression remained unreadable, her eyes locking onto Corinne with unflinching precision. "Maintaining order?" she repeated, her tone low, measured, almost surgical. "Mrs. Mitchell, the ledger shows $48,000 diverted from community funds into your personal accounts. That is not order. That is theft. That is abuse of authority. And no amount of pleading or self-justification changes that fact." Corinne's fingers fumbled with her papers. She opened her mouth again, but the words came out as fragmented stammers. I repay. Was going to repay. Repay? Judy's voice sharpened, cutting through the courtroom with a precision that left no room for evasion. Repayment does not erase the violation. Borrowing without consent, misappropriating funds, and punishing residents while lining your own pockets is a breach of trust, Mrs. Mitchell. Trust, once broken, cannot simply be patched over with excuses or promises. The audience shifted, leaning forward in tense anticipation. Cameras zoomed in on Corinne's face, her eyes wide, her expression flickering between panic and denial. Every subtle quiver, every tightening jawline, told the story her words could no longer hide. The queen had been dethroned, and she could feel it in every fiber of her being. Asterisk. Judy continued, her voice now measured but carrying a quiet intensity that made the air in the courtroom feel dense. "Let's focus on specifics. Transfers labeled maintenance reimbursement were made the day after fines were imposed on Mrs. Cortez. These transfers were precise, recurring, and consistent over a 4-year period. Do you deny this?" Karen opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. The words she had once wielded as weapons, smirks, interruptions, rehearsed defenses, had abandoned her. Her hands shook as she tried to steady them on the table. The audience collectively held its breath. Even the bailiff's stern posture softened slightly, sensing the raw inevitability of the moment. Judge Judy leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Mrs. Mitchell, you've spent years constructing an image of control and authority. You've enforced rules, issued fines, and demanded submission. But every rule you enforce, every fine you levied, every intimidating letter you sent has now become part of the evidence against you. Do you understand the magnitude of what has been uncovered?" Corinne's voice was barely audible. I didn't realize. Judy echoed, the words precise and cutting. "You didn't realize that misappropriating nearly $50,000 Targeting families like the Cortezes and hiding behind authority would have consequences. Mrs. Mitchell, this is not a negotiation. This is accountability. The air was thick with tension. Corinne's facade was gone. Every carefully constructed layer of arrogance, entitlement, and control had cracked, leaving the woman exposed, vulnerable, and entirely unprepared to face the storm she had helped conjure. Judy's voice softened slightly, though the edge of steel remained. I've seen people like you, Mrs. Mitchell. People who confuse authority with immunity. People who believe the rules apply to everyone else but themselves. You've run your neighborhood like a kingdom, but a kingdom without ethics is nothing more than tyranny. And tyranny, as you are about to discover, collapses under the weight of justice. Corinne's hands clenched the edge of the desk. Her voice broke as she tried to reclaim some semblance of control. But I've done so much for this community. I've worked tirelessly. Judy raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Your work has been measured not in service, Mrs. Mitchell, but in fines, intimidation, and self-enrichment. You have taken money, dignity, and peace from those who trusted you. And now, the law is reclaiming what is rightfully theirs. The courtroom was silent except for Corinne's shallow breaths. Every person present could feel the collapse of her authority, the unraveling of her carefully constructed persona. Cameras captured the tremor in her hands, the widening of her eyes, the faint quiver of her lips. The woman who had once instilled fear was now a portrait of impending reckoning. Asterisk Judge Judy leaned back, her eyes never leaving Corinne. We are not done. Mrs. Mitchell, this court must now determine restitution and forfeiture. Every asset purchased with misappropriated funds will be claimed, every dollar accounted for, every injustice measured and addressed. You had a choice to act with integrity. You did not. Now the consequences are inescapable. Karen's knees trembled. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please, I can fix this. I can repay." Repayment is irrelevant without accountability, Judy replied, her tone a mixture of calm authority and undeniable finality. And accountability is what you're about to face. You believed you were untouchable. You believed your laughter and arrogance could mask wrongdoing. Now every eye in this room has witnessed the truth. Your reign is over, Mrs. Mitchell. Your power is gone. And the law will ensure it stays that way. For the first time, Karen's gaze fell not on the audience, not on the cameras, not even on Judy herself, but on her trembling hands. The very hands that had orchestrated years of control and cruelty. The weight of realization pressed down, suffocating, undeniable. The room held its breath. The countdown to her final humiliation, the stripping away of her authority and possessions, had begun. Every person present understood that this was no longer a small claim dispute. This was the downfall of a tyrant. Every smile, every fine, every act of intimidation she had wielded against. Willow Creek Estates had built the record of her ruin. Karen Mitchell had spent years commanding fear. Now, she was about to become the subject of it. Asterisk, the courtroom felt frozen in time, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Karen Mitchell, once the unchallenged ruler of Willow Creek Estates, sat slumped in her chair, the weight of inevitability pressing down like a physical force. Her hands trembled, her makeup smudged, and her lips quivered as the final act of her decade-long reign drew near. Judge Judy's gavels tapped lightly, a measured rhythm that carried the weight of absolute authority. Mrs. Mitchell, she began, her voice calm but unforgiving, we've reviewed all evidence, all financial records, and all testimonies from the community. Your misappropriation of funds, your intimidation of residents, and your abuse of authority have been proven beyond any doubt. This court is now prepared to deliver its ruling. Karen's breath hitched. She had rehearsed countless defenses in her head, excuses for every violation, every dollar diverted, every humiliation she had inflicted. But now, all of that preparation crumbled into silence. She could feel the eyes of every resident, every camera, every viewer watching her unravel. Judy continued, her tone deliberate and precise. As of today, Mrs. Mitchell, all assets acquired through the misuse of Willow Creek HOA funds are to be forfeited. This includes your residence, any vehicles, bank accounts, and any other property linked to these actions. The funds recovered will be returned to the community and the victims of your misconduct. Karen's hands fell from the desk. No, my house. My home, she whispered, a fragile tremor in her voice. Her knees buckled slightly, but the bailiff gently steadied her. The courtroom remained silent, every heartbeat amplified by the tension in the room. You believed you could bend the rules to your will. Judy continued, her gaze unwavering. You thought laughter and authority could shield you from accountability. But every action you took has led to this moment. Arrogance has a cost, Mrs. Mitchell, and today, that cost is coming due. Karen's lips parted, attempting a protest, but only a shaky sound escaped. The folders of evidence, the detailed financial reports, the testimonies of countless neighbors, everything she had tried to control had now turned against her. She was no longer the queen. She was exposed, vulnerable, and powerless. Judy's voice softened slightly, though the authority never wavered. For years, you mistreated good people, exploiting their trust and punishing them for living their lives. Today, this court restores balance. The property at Willow Creek Lane will be seized, sold, and the proceeds used to compensate those harmed by your actions. Any attempt to retain these assets will be met with further legal action. Karen's trembling escalated into audible sobs. Her head fell into her hands, the reality of her collapse settling like a stone in her chest. The arrogance that had once defined her existence was gone, replaced by a raw, unfiltered fear she had never known. The clerk read aloud the final orders, each word a hammer striking down the walls of her former empire. The total restitution amount, the forfeiture of assets, and the immediate seizure of her home were all enumerated, leaving nothing to interpretation. Karen sat frozen, each word driving her deeper into the reality she had long avoided. Judge Judy leaned back, her eyes still locked on Karen. Power is meaningless without integrity. Mrs. Mitchell, you mistook authority for control, fear for respect, and now you're left with nothing but the consequences of your actions. Let this be a lesson not just to you, but to anyone who believes they are above the law. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of whispers and soft exclamations. Residents who had suffered under Karen's reign exchanged quiet, relieved glances. The Cortez family sat together, hands clasped, witnessing justice finally restored. Their sunflowers, once the target of Karen's petty enforcement, seemed almost symbolic, a small triumph of patience and resilience over tyranny. Karen's sobs grew louder. She tried to speak, to plead, but her words were swallowed by the weight of inevitability. Every misused dollar, every fine imposed, every cruel letter she had mailed over the years had converged into this moment, and there was no escape. The bailiff escorted her from the courtroom. Her steps were heavy, hesitant, and unlike the confident strut she had once perfected. Cameras followed, capturing the image of a woman who had ruled with fear, now reduced to trembling uncertainty. Outside, reporters swarmed, shouting questions, but Karen gave no answers. She walked past the flashing lights, past the microphones, carrying nothing but the echo of her own downfall. Back in Willow Creek Estates, life began to reclaim its natural rhythm. Residents emerged from years of cautious silence, greeting neighbors without fear of fines or intimidation. The HOA board, now restructured, dissolved Karen's oppressive policies, refunded wrongful charges, and reinstated a sense of community long suppressed in the center of the neighborhood park. A new bench was installed beneath the old oak tree, a brass plaque bearing a simple message: power means nothing if it costs your humanity. It was a reminder that authority without ethics is fragile, and that the true measure of leadership is integrity, not fear. Karen Mitchell, now removed from her throne, settled into a small, modest apartment far from the neighborhood she once ruled. The eviction notice that had arrived months earlier was the final punctuation to a life built on control and arrogance. In her new reality, she was left alone with silence, no rules to enforce, no meetings to dominate, no laughter to project. Only reflection and the faint, haunting memory of the very laugh that had once announced her power and now marked her downfall. The story of Karen Mitchell did not fade quietly. Clips of the courtroom, her laughter, her defiance, and the moment she realized the extent of her ruin went viral, shared across every platform. Millions watched the cautionary tale unfold, a reminder that no one, no matter how seemingly untouchable, is above accountability. Judge Judy, true to form, never publicized her personal thoughts on the case. When asked about the viral video, she simply said, "Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be seen." Those words resonated far beyond the courtroom, a statement of truth in an age where arrogance often speaks louder than honesty. Karen Mitchell's story, however, lingered, not as a tale of victory, but as a lesson in humility. The once mighty HOA queen had been stripped of her power, her wealth, and her pride, left to confront a life in which control was an illusion. And justice finally was real. The residents of Willow Creek Estates could finally breathe. Children played freely once more, neighbors spoke without fear, and the community flourished under genuine leadership. The sunflowers in the Cortez yard swayed gently in the morning breeze, a testament to endurance, resilience, and the eventual triumph of truth over arrogance. And somewhere, in a quiet apartment far from her former kingdom, Karen Mitchell sat alone. She stared at the eviction notice, the memory of the courtroom laughter echoing in her mind, and whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe it's time I start over." It was not forgiveness. It was not redemption. It was the first glimmer of honesty she had faced in a lifetime spent wielding power without conscience. Justice, as it often does, had been delivered not with fanfare or spectacle, but with the quiet, undeniable force of truth. And for Willow Creek Estates, and for the countless lives touched by one woman's unchecked arrogance, that was more than enough.